So you still want me. So that means I'm not doing that bad of a job. Although it says Android here, my talk will not be focused on Android only. I am an Android fanboy. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate Apple products. I just don't use them. Well, let's start off with a question first. So, I hate pointers. So, if I gave you a piece of paper and I would ask you to cut it, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And you have to yell. It's an interactive presentation, talk. What's the first thing you think of? Sorry? Yeah? Any tools? Scissors? Knife? Well, we're getting into the creative flow, yeah. Hands? Yeah, most of the time, so I did ask this question a couple of times during a start of user research, and everybody say, well, scissors, obviously. But if you think of the thing we're trying to do, it doesn't have to be scissors. It doesn't have to be any tool. You can use your hands. You can even, well, if you go full out, use a blowtorch, whatever you like. It's probably not the best choice of tool. And this got me thinking, because it's quite hard for us. I'm a developer, and I'm really into UX. It's quite hard to actually solve these kinds of problems. So if I ask you, a question, how would you respond? And what's your expectation of, in this case, cutting a piece of paper? And most of the people think of solutions instead of the problem. I'm not saying you should have asked me, hey, why do you want me to cut a piece of paper? No, but in our day-to-day job, what we do, we think of solutions. If you ask a developer, he always thinks in code. If you ask a designer, he always thinks in sketches. But in fact, people like you and me should stop and think about what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And I'm hating clickers. And it's the same for developers and designers. They think of solutions. How would I solve that with code? How would I sketch that in Sketch or a Framer or whatever? Instead of, well, what is it they are expecting from us to do? Why am I cutting a piece of paper? Why am I designing an icon? What's the reason behind? And this is basically the essence of my talk. I'm trying to explain how you can think and solve for user expectations. And there will not be any code. Yay. Well, you have whole day, and tomorrow whole day. Probably you will see a lot of Kotlin, you see a lot of Swift, so hey, no code. So this is me. This was taken last year, by the way, so whenever the photographer comes, I will hunt him down. I'm a Google Developer Expert for Android and a Google Developer Expert for product strategy. Basically, I know how to build shit, and I build it. But most of my talks is about UX, user, the behavior of a person that is using, most of the time, a mobile phone. And I want to know who my audience is. Also, this is taken last year. Is anybody on this picture in the audience right now? Raise your hands. Yay! Why are you still here? It's the second time. So raise your hands if you're a designer. Oh, bold. This one or two. Developer? iOS person? Just one, two. Android, obviously. Come on, show me the love. Yes. Any managers out there? What are you doing here? I don't know either. So, I wanted to say a diverse group, but it's not a diverse group, just Android peeps here, and some lonely people. God, why is this click? I'm just losing the clicker. So, my talk will be about user expectations. And it's a scary word, user expectations. It's only two parts, expectations, what to expect, and user. And for me, I'm always fascinated about the user. because a user is like you and me. How are they using my product? What are they thinking? What are they expecting? What's the behavior of a person? And I did a lot of user research. I've looked at a lot of people actually using mobile phones and tried to figure out what's their truth. What do they think of an app or a product? And most marketing people would say, well, this is the kind of user we're searching for. Everybody's happy using their mobile phone, right? So the manager is saying, yeah. But actually we're making apps for normal people, not the happy, smiley people. We use our mobile phone on a day-to-day basis. And that's challenging because there are so many different people out there. So how can we expect that we build or design products for so many different people? And people use their mobile phone in weird places that I didn't even expect. So I was at a concert and I was enjoying the music, and all of a sudden the main band came up. It was Guns N' Roses, which I don't like, but hey, I was there. And all of a sudden everybody was turning on their mobile phone and recording. And for me, that's quite silly, because why do I want to take the experience of listening to music and seeing the band perform and just stop and just look at my mobile phone? But apparently people are doing that. Also, I was at a trip in South Africa, and I like animals. I was on a mini safari, let's just keep it by that. And obviously there was a giraffe, there were multiple, and I really enjoyed looking at the giraffe. And all of a sudden, the people that were in the car were more taken by having to have the proper selfie for Instagram instead of enjoying that moment. And why did it struck me so bad? Because we are used to interact with mobile phone instead of persons. And there are so many persons, it's so diverse. So what is that single user that we're targeting? What are we building for whom? It's quite hard. If you have so many different, you have iOS peeps, you have Android peeps. Obviously, Android peeps will love everything Google is making. But you have so many cultures, so many backgrounds. How can we expect, or how can anyone expect me to build something that is useful for all? I'm still not sure, so this is like a spoiler already. So let's look at some of the users' truth out there that I discovered. Well, first, they don't trust you. The reason why I took this picture is I have a serious problem with raisin cookies. Because every time I want to eat a raisin cookie, it looks like they're scamming me, and it looks like a chocolate cookie, which is not. And, well, I do like chocolate, but not when I'm expecting raisins. It is a natural behavior of a human being that is not trustworthy to other people, but also in apps. How much struggle was it for Facebook when they opened up and they initially shared some information? Why is there now laws that tell us you can't share just your personal information? We do share a lot. But the tendency of a human being is not to trust anything. And that is a struggle within your app as well, when you create apps. And for me, one of the key things is when they introduce like permission, it got me thinking, well, this is one of the issues. For me as a app developer, I need some sort of additional information, and I need to ask user for permission. But giving so much permission for a app to use, it seems silly. It doesn't have to be. And it breaks the bond, it breaks the trust between you and your user. So be careful with that when you create your mobile app. They expect you to communicate. It is not an option anymore if you create mobile apps not to listen to your user, not only by review, but have a direct communication with them. Ask them for feedback. Don't wait until you get feedback, because most of the feedback will be crappy. always be, if you don't focus on a way of communicating throughout the app or product or branch or whatever, you get into serious trouble. What's the name of the female, by the way? Is that your president or your ministry in Poland? It's the wife. Oh, I love her. I love her. Are there any Americans in the room? There might be some Trump bashing going on during my talk. No? So if you communicate, it's not only direct, but it can also be, if you're doing an action and you want something, or there's something going on that is wrong, just communicate, be honest. I'm not saying that in your app, everything that goes wrong, you have to say, I'm sorry, we're crap, don't use it. But give some feedback. If you click on something, give them feedback. If they have to have an option, ask them. Don't be afraid to go head on with that user. App people are smarter than we used to think. Okay, there are some stupid people out there, don't get me wrong. Like 50% of the Americans voted for Trump, so that's obvious. But because we use our mobile phone on a day-to-day basis, I as a person, as a user, because I'm a user as well, I know how my mobile phone works. I don't need an app to explain the obvious. I'm used to patterns. I know what a button does, and take this in consideration when you create your app. For instance, this marketing photo, there were actually two. Do you see what the problem is? Yeah. How do they expect us to believe that is a solid work situation when they're holding the thing in their hands? They'll probably have third-degree burns. Don't ever underestimate the dumbness or the smartness of a user. So if you create your mobile app, give them the experience of the whole platform, there are patterns out there which are so obvious. So we had a struggle with this is one of the screens of an app we designed. It's for an airport, and when you click on a search, you will search your flight. And for us, it was fine. We know the fab, it's a well-known design pattern. But people still had a tough time finding out. So how can we convince the user, which aren't dumb, so they know if you search on a button, you will probably find a button. Well, how can you reach that 2% that might be not as smart? So we solved it by having like an additional find your flight button. It's non-intrusive, but it still has the additional option to get what you want. Also, if you save the flight, you can have a add flight button underneath. Again, it's not intrusive, it's quite small, but it gives you that extra incentive to get people to understand what your app is doing. People are quite busy, apparently. We don't have time to do much. So if you create a product that has so many different features, like 62% of your features will not be discovered because people just don't have time. If you have a website, they will skim over the content, they will pick whatever they want, and that's fine. We're in a rush. We have obviously better things to do than stare at a mobile phone, unless you're on Instagram. So take that in consideration when you build your product. For instance, a camera app. If you create a camera app, the only sole purpose is to take a picture. You're not gonna do 5, 6, 7 things before you're actually taking the picture. I'm in a hurry, I just want to take a picture and leave. Do you know this guy, by the way? Yeah. If not, he's sitting in front. I will bash him because he normally does it the same to me. So whenever you create a product, make it as easy to use. I'm not saying you need to ditch all the different other features, but make it the core function, what you want to achieve, as easy as possible. People are in different moods and modes. What I mean by that is, for instance, it's not smart to send out a notification on a Monday morning. Why? Because everybody's moody, because everybody needs to go to work. That's one of the marketing strategies that is well known. Don't disturb people on the Monday morning. Tuesday is probably better. Take that in consideration when you create an app. You see now everybody loves dark mode these days. Apple is doing something, but obviously Android was already doing something with that. The reason behind the dark mode is it's not only because it's better for your eye, it gives you a soothing feeling. Whenever it's night, you don't want to have a flashy, you just want to enjoy, have an easy experience. So take those moods and modes into consideration when you're creating your product. One of the key features of Android I still love is you have the do not disturb option. So whenever I think I'm overwhelmed with all the information, or it's Monday morning, I don't want to have like 18 different Slack messages in 1 minute, I press on the do not disturb. You have even the wind down mode these days for Android, so when you can set it at, let's say, 11 p.m., you can relax, you don't get disturbed anymore, and you can go to bed quite with ease. As I told you, besides being busy, people just do what they wanted to do as quickly as possible. Again, if you're on a website, and there were studies, they only skim the content. So that doesn't mean even if you have a lot of text, a lot of features in your app, they will only pick out what they want at that certain time. They're not going to read a whole lot of instructions, even though we have like onboarding, which gives you a little bit of insight on how the app is working. Everybody just wants to pick what they use and are done with it. Again, really important when you create the apps. This is the truth of a user. They're not gonna search the whole app, what all the possibilities are. Probably they will not use the app as intended. I mean, there are some examples. My personal example is I created a application for an airport, and we thought, well, it's for frequent flyers, we get it out there and everybody's happy. And the first day everybody was, there were taxi drivers actually in front of the building because they use our app, and we didn't know that. And the reason why, they want to earn as much money as possible. So they pick specific flights from Dubai, for instance, when they know there's more money to be asked for a taxi drive. It's not like Uber, where you know which you're going to take. So taking that in consideration, it's always handy for your app to have either some sort of feedback option or a way of a user to make sure that not all data is collected. Because it is quite important for us as a developer to have those statistics saying how are people using the app. But be careful, again, you're breaking the trust if you're not giving them the option to say, stop monitoring me. They love familiarity. I mean, I love knowing when I open an app, oh, you have got the fab, I know that pattern, so it's probably something of a main action I can do. I love being part of a brand. If everything is in the Google colors, I will be happy. But it's also, when you have your brand product, it must feel familiar to you, to your app. So in this case, even though it's the YouTube app, it does feel like it's part of the Mobiconf family get-together. And it's also really important. Obviously, there are some talks from Adidas today. They will probably cover this as well. But the key feature is we want to belong to a group. We want to belong to a family. And if we're really happy with that, in your product, give them the option to feel that familiarity. So now you know a little bit about how users see our apps. How can we get into the flow of actually understanding the user and combining it with your day-to-day job, like a developer or designing? We need to start thinking on how can we think like them. And it's kind of weird because I'm a user self, but obviously I'm a super user because I use my mobile phone more than my mother, for instance. but getting into an understanding on how your app is being used by your user can get you ready for the user expectations. So let's look at some of the process you can adopt to create or be ready for the user. First of all, and I talked about this last year, do some research. And I'm not saying like you need, whenever you have a product, go out, rent an expensive office, do some monitoring. You can easily do it with family, friends, within your own company, as long as you try to pick some of the different people to have a diverse group of, to have a good understanding of the different people that use your app. And it's quite hard. I can talk to you about user research for hours, but if you don't use it, if you don't do the research, how can you be ready for what they expect? So a good example is design thinking. Does anybody know what design thinking is? Raise your hands. That's not much. Okay. That's kind of weird. Design thinking is the whole process of focusing on the user's needs instead of, let's say, marketing, and getting into that mindset. So we used to do waterfall, we still use sprints, but those are techniques to make sure features are ready. Design thinking is more the opposite. When you focus on a user and within a short span, try to figure out what their major problem is and what are some good alternatives to do so. So for in this case, the truck is stuck. And I normally ask, well, what are some options to get the truck unstuck? So what are some good options? Everybody's asleep, especially the people in the red chairs. Let the tires down. So that's one. Come on.
Go back and find another way.
Yeah. So I did ask several groups as well. So emergency people, fire people, insurance companies, and actual truck drivers. The answers I get is obviously demolish the truck, just drive it backwards and see where it goes. I even have people saying, well, we need to chip down the bridge. And it sounds funny. How's the coffee, by the way? It is funny, but for them, it's the truth. And I didn't take that in consideration. Obviously, it's a truck, so it's much easier to demolish the truck or flatten the tires and drive back, sure. But I didn't take in consideration that there's a different point of view actually to solve this. And one of the truck drivers says, well, I'm discussing the best approach with a fighter because they are officially the way, or emergency people, to handle these kinds of situations. So that for me, that felt like, oh, that's a manager talking. We have to discuss, we have to have a meeting how to get the truck out. But gives you a good insight on the different approaches and the different people. But on a day-to-day basis, let's say we have a problem, we are designing a feature. Is it normal for a design thinking process to do that? We already know what we're going to build. We need to have an additional payment feature in the app. Design thinking is more people having trouble paying. So how can we solve that? What's their biggest pain point? Are they feeling insecure about paying? Can we solve that for them, making more instructions? Or should we make it easier for them? Let's say using Google Pay. That's a more design approach than the old-fashioned way where we have a set of features that we're going to build. And that's a different mindset. So let me clarify a little bit about the whole design thinking. It is people-centered, so it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about my pride, it's not about the manager, things, even the product owner, even though he holds the brands. It's all about the user and the problems, finding out what their are missing, what they find is difficult to use. So it is really human-centered. It is highly creative because we analyze the different problems that the users are having. We know we can now look at different approaches how to solve that. Again, with the truck, we didn't take in consideration the side from demolishing the bridge. So looking at different alternatives is really a creative process of thinking out of the box. You still have those centered problems the user is having, but you're trying to figure out different approaches and different solutions. It's hands-on. I mean, this is the best way to use prototyping. If you can create a prototype which visualize some of the alternatives, you can even test it with users, saying, well, you have a problem paying, is this what you're looking for? If I just tap a mobile phone on a terminal and you pay, is it what you, do you find it scary, or do you think it's much more easy this way for you to do your payment? And failure is really a big essential on the hands-on, because failure is part of a success. If I prototype and know what's not working, I can focus on what is working and find out if that single solution is the one we need to implement. And it's iterative. So this is not a process I do normally for waterfall. You can do this as much time as long as you focus on the end solution, having to solve the user's problem, to knowing what they expect and what they want, using a prototype and iterate a couple of times till actually knowing what you should be doing. A good example of design thinking. This is actually 2 weeks ago. I was at one of the customers, and it was lunchtime, and somebody pulled this out of the bag. Do you know what it is? A case for what? A banana. Yeah, right. And it fascinated me. I thought, this is stupid. It looks like a banana. You can fit a banana in. So why do you want a case just for your banana? It doesn't make sense to me as a user. So I discussed, and I said, well, why did you bought this? And her biggest problem was, when she really loves bananas, obviously, but she had brown bananas all the time because her banana were crushed in her bag. So she needed protection for that banana, and this is a good solution. So I was discussing this with her and thinking, okay, is this really the solution for you? Is this, yeah, the end problem is taken away. The bananas are good most of the time. And I thought, well, most of the time, so I did ask, what's the problem? The downside is getting the banana in. Because you have this case which has a curve. That doesn't mean that's the same curve as your banana. So she had to bend her banana into that case. But then you get a brown banana again. So this is a cycle that wasn't really good. So the whole concept of design thinking is you have a problem for brown bananas because they were crushed. You have a product that can help you, but is this really helpful because you still need to bend those bananas to get it in? Or even worse, she said, well, it's not the only one. I also have this. Obviously, from a design point of view, I know where it is. But she's not using it for apples, for nectarines. So it's kind of weird, but it's in that mindset that you need to be, figuring out what works for you. Having the focus on the problem, the bananas, trying to solve different angles, and is it the end product, and iterate over it. So this is, for me, a good example of looking at products and looking at problems. Obviously, because I'm a Google fanboy, Google helped me. There is something called a design sprint. Does anybody know what a design sprint is? That's funny, because there are more arms now than there are when I ask about design thinking. A design sprint is exactly the same principle as design thinking. It is actually design thinking, but it's a process that's defined by Google Capital Ventures, and consists, basically what you're doing is you lock some key holders in a room for a week, which is hard, without their mobile phone, which is even harder. And you say at the beginning, we're gonna investigate, and in the end, we're gonna test. So those boundaries we have. You start with, what are some bigger problems that we need to tackle? And make it as big as possible. The bigger the issue, the better it is if you know if the end result works. So not only from, we have a payment issue for a specific customer, no. We want to be a multimillionaire. How can we solve that? And that's our biggest problem, because we're not a multimillionaire. And that first day, you try to, with all different kinds of techniques, dot voting, you try to figure out what are the biggest problems we need to tackle. And in the second day, you try to have a different kind of, you skim those down to the one that you want to solve, what you think is the best value for the user, and obviously for a US company, but for the user, because it's always the user problem. On day 3, you try to think of different solutions on a piece of paper, and you vote on what you think is the best solution. So you have the biggest problem, which you all agree is the biggest problem. You have, from all the 20, 25 different solutions, you pick out what you think as a team thinks is the most valuable to do. And on day 3, on day 4, you are prototyping, and it has to be like, it does need to feel like a finished product. So if you're creating a mobile app, fake some screens, as long as it feels like it's working. You can click on it, stuff happens. If you're creating robots, it doesn't have to be like a real working robot, but you can have steering into it when somebody pushing it, as long as it feels authentic. And the last day, you actually are interviewing users and ask them to try it out. And not in a way of, hey, we created a prototype, can you test? No, you say, well, we have a problem. It's your biggest problem. Here's your mobile app, here's your mobile application. Can you solve that task? You're not saying it's a prototype, it's fake. Getting the reaction, getting the feedback of the user, if he actually, with your prototype, can solve your biggest problem, knows either they can and it's a big success. No, they can't, it's a big failure, but still a big success because I'm not spending half a year coding and designing stuff to know if it works. Or it can somehow work, but still needs some fine-tuning or a different approach on some sectors. All 3 answers are valid. You spend only a week trying to solve the biggest problem with the least amount of money, and in the end of the week, you know what the success rate is. Again, a failure is a success as well. If I know our solution that we thought was the best one isn't implied, that means I either have to go do it all over again, but I know I don't need to spend many time and much money on that solution. A good example for this is one of our customers. It's an amusement park in the Netherlands, and one of the biggest pains for customers is waiting in line. That was the biggest thing. So we did a full week with product owner stakeholders, somebody at the park who sees customers all the time, which is not a customer, and me to kind of maintain it. And we thought, well, how can we solve the waiting in line biggest pain? So what do you think might be some solutions we found? And you need to yell. Come on, be creative. Entertain them. Okay? Re-entry. Free drinks. It's funny because all those were actually on the board as well. So we can't take away the fact that people need to wait. We couldn't do that. We can't say we have an additional right because it's not screens on. Yeah, it's also a good solution. So we eventually voted, or we looked at different alternatives. Waiting time is obviously popular, but still, people need to wait. It is an option. We can't control the waiting times, so that's the biggest factor. We can say you have to wait 10 minutes now, and it's up to the user, but he gets annoyed because he still has either to wait or he can't take the ride. So that was for us one of the key things why we not choose it. Obviously, it's an amusement park for kids, so free drinks is not on the table. And what we thought was the biggest solution for our biggest problem is, why don't we entertain? And I thought somebody, who said entertain? Okay, see me afterwards, I have some Dutch sweets for you. We can entertainment, so the hassle of waiting until you get into ride will be taken away. There's a facade if you play a game. So what did we create? We created a game, and for one of the rides, it was a kiddie ride. We make it a little bit fun, a little bit playful. So we did create this in a week. It wasn't like a full working on app, but it plays a video, and you can pick some points, and there's some QR code. So it's really active. You have to take a picture, and you can play, and then you have to wait, and you can play a game and take another picture. So it's really fun. It can go into the theme of that ride. So it's kind of branding and feels familiar, so it's not really that intrusive. So we were really happy. We created a prototype, and then on the day we were really happy, and we did do a test run. So we didn't say this is fake. We just made some boards and gave people some mobile phones and say, hey, it's quite a hassle. Do you want to play? And they started playing. And people were happy, weren't really that moody anymore. So we thought this was the best solution out there. There were some side effects. People were so into the game that they're not walking as fast as they can. So the queue got bigger. People apparently wanted to finish the game, so they didn't go onto the ride. And the other one, because of seasons and location, if we would have created something with a Wi-Fi, or you need to download the app on your mobile phone, you're not actually going onto the ride. You first need to do something before you're actually going to enjoy. So all those things take away the pleasure of going into the ride, and actually became even worse because you have so many queues. So what we thought was a best solution. It was fun, don't get me wrong, but it did take away one of the biggest problems, the waiting, and it introduced an even longer line. So for us, it was a lessons learned that this is probably not the best solution. In the end, we did choose to be transparent and give him the option of the waiting times and a fast check-in, so they can still do other rides. But that was our second sprint, so we ended up doing that. One other thing you can do for the design sprint is whenever we create stuff, I need to rush now, what I call eat your own dog food. So whenever you create an app, you should be your user self. A good example is Deliveroo. During the onboarding, people are mandatory, so it's a delivery service where you drive a scooter and they create an app so you can order and they will bring it to you. They are mandatory to drive scooters the first couple of weeks to have a good understanding on how the drivers see their user. No, I'm gonna skip this. The other thing is, I do a lot of research these days on accessibility. So if you create an app that has additional accessibility. So if you're blind or partial blind or you're colorblind, there are some options in Android you can use to switch on and you can hear it properly. If you don't test it, I'm not saying you have to do this, you can even do it blindfolded, but if you not tested it this way, you're not going to know how it works. Assumption can be really bad. So try to eat your own dog food. So in conclusion, nice. You can't please all. There isn't a single user you can satisfy. There are so many different users, there's so many different cultural backgrounds. You can't please them all. So take that in consideration. You're not going to please everybody. Do your research. If you don't know your user or your target group or the people that you're building, at least a subsection of it, you will fail, trust me, or you won't succeed at least. Always ask why. If you do user interviews, if you see people using your mobile product and you see them struggling, don't help them out. Ask them what's the issue. You can always say, well, I work for the company, but why are you struggling? The why question is much easier than the let me help you question. Pick a process that works for you. So we do design sprint that works for you. It may be a hassle because it's a full-on week. You can reduce it to 3 days. It doesn't mean that it works for you, but at least take it seriously and choose a process which works for you when you focus on the user instead of only the product. And then start thinking. Thank you. Do I have time? Yeah. Questions? I want to see somebody with a mic running all the way in the back. Please, somebody in the back have a question. Can be silly. Let them run. No? Okay. Dziękuję.